I still remember the sound of her voice that day. It was sharp and cold, cutting through the warm air of that summer afternoon like a knife that had been waiting quietly to strike. It was supposed to be a gentle day, her birthday, a day meant for celebration and soft smiles. A day when family would sit around the same table and share simple joy. But instead, I stood there holding a small set of car keys in my hand, my fingers trembling just enough for me to notice, while she stared at the old Toyota parked in the driveway as though it were an insult carved into metal. "I deserve a Mercedes," she screamed. "Not this piece of garbage Toyota." Her voice echoed in the air, louder than the birds and the soft rustling leaves, louder even than the children playing down the street. For a moment, everything around me felt distant and blurry, as if the world itself stepped back from what was happening. And I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I did not explain that I had spent months saving what little I could. I didn't tell her that I had repaired the old Toyota with my own hands, tightening bolts with fingers still stiff from age and cleaning the seats late at night under the dim yellow garage light. I simply smiled, a small, fragile smile, the kind someone wears when they are trying to hide a heart that has quietly cracked in the wrong moment. My son stood beside her, silent, his shoulders stiff, his eyes shifting between her anger and my face as though he wanted to speak, but had swallowed his voice long ago. That was the day everything changed, not only for me, but for all of us. And that is where this story truly begins. My name is Helen, and I am 68 years old. My hands are softer than they once were, though still marked with the small scars left by a lifetime of cooking, fixing, cleaning, and caring. I have lived a simple life. Not a perfect one, not a grand one, but a life full of the kind of quiet moments that I once believed made a family unbreakable. When my husband passed away 12 years ago, I felt the world shift beneath me. He was a gentle man with soft eyes and slow steps, a man who believed kindness lasted longer than resentment. I still try to remember his words when life feels heavier than I can carry. Our son, Daniel, is 35 now. When he was little, he used to hold my hand during thunderstorms because he thought I was the one who felt afraid. He grew up thoughtful and polite, the kind of child who brought calm into a room. When he married Maya, I believed we were gaining another family member, not losing one. Maya was bright, confident, and full of fast-moving energy. She spoke quickly, lived quickly, and expected the world to move at the same speed. She came from a wealthier family, a more modern one, and she had grown up with more comfort than we ever had. Still, I thought love could bridge every difference. I welcomed her with open arms. I cooked her favorite meals, listened to her talk about her job and her dreams of owning a large house with a tall fence and a shiny kitchen. I remember her first visit to our home. She looked around and said, "It's cute. Old-fashioned, but cute." I laughed it off back then, telling myself she meant no harm. She was young, after all, and used to different things. But comments like that became a quiet pattern, small remarks that seemed harmless, but stayed with me long after she left the room. When I decided to give her the old Toyota for her birthday, I knew some people might laugh. But that car was more than a car. It had belonged to my husband. It had carried our groceries, our arguments, our laughter, and our Sunday morning drives. I kept it after he passed away because letting it go felt like letting go of him. Years later, when Daniel and Maya's second car broke down and I knew they were struggling financially, I thought maybe the Toyota could help. Maybe giving it to them would solve one of their problems. Maybe it would remind Daniel of his father's steady love. Maybe Maya would see the effort even if the car didn't shine like new metal. I spent weeks cleaning it, polishing it, replacing small parts, and making sure it was safe and smooth to drive. When Maya's birthday approached, I felt hopeful. I imagined her smiling and feeling grateful even if it was not the luxury she dreamed of. That morning, the air was warm and soft. I woke early, made breakfast, and placed the keys inside a small gift box with a ribbon. As I set it on the kitchen table, I whispered, "I hope this helps you, my dear." Later in the afternoon, they arrived. I heard their laughter as they walked up the driveway. Maya's heels clicked sharply against the pavement while Daniel held a small bouquet of flowers. I stepped outside with the box in my hand, feeling nervous and excited. I have a surprise, I told them, trying to steady my voice. Maya opened the box and blinked at the keys. A car, she asked. Yes, I said softly, it's in the driveway. She turned and saw the Toyota, all cleaned and polished, waiting quietly in the warm sunlight like an old friend trying to make a good impression. Her smile dropped instantly. Her face shifted from confusion to disappointment to something sharper. This? This is the car, she asked, her voice growing tight. It was my husband's, I tried to explain. I fixed it up. I thought it might help, but she cut me off. I deserve a Mercedes. Not this piece of garbage Toyota. The words hit me harder than I expected. It felt like the air left the space around us. She continued, louder now, why would you think this is appropriate? How could you think I would drive something like that? I watched Daniel look at her, then at me. He looked lost, as if he wanted to step forward but could not find the courage. I realized then that he was not going to defend me. Not today. Not anymore. I forced myself to smile, though it felt like my face might break. I'm sorry, I whispered. I only wanted to help. Maya crossed her arms and said, next time, ask me what I want. I don't need charity. The word charity burned quietly inside me, but I did not fight. I simply nodded. Daniel touched her arm gently and said, let's go inside. Not, Mom meant well. Not, please stop. Just, let's go inside. And in that moment, I knew something gentle in our family had finally bent too far and was beginning to break. In the days that followed her birthday, the house felt different. Not my house, mine was the same as always, quiet and filled with the soft ticking of the living room clock, but their home. Or rather, the space between us. Before that day, Maya used to send me little messages now and then. A picture of a meal she had cooked. A question about a recipe. A short greeting on a busy morning. But after the incident with the Toyota, everything became colder. Her messages stopped completely, and my son's messages grew shorter. Where he once wrote, Mom, how are you? We will visit this weekend, he now wrote, busy this week. Maybe next time. The maybe hurt more than the busy. It reminded me of a door slowly closing, not with a slam, but with a quiet click that you cannot undo once it happens. I did not tell anyone how I felt. I am not the kind of woman who speaks loudly about her pain. I kept busy. I watered my plants. I cleaned the kitchen even when it was already clean. I cooked meals I knew I would end up eating alone. But somewhere inside, I kept replaying her words as if they were written in a place I could not erase. I deserve a Mercedes. Not this piece of garbage Toyota. The strange thing is, I was not angry. Not truly. I was sad. I felt small, as though something I had offered with love had been thrown back at me, not because it wasn't enough, but because I wasn't enough. A week later, Daniel finally called. His voice was gentle but strained. Mom, he said, about the car. I waited, hoping he might say something comforting. He continued. Maya felt embarrassed. She said she just didn't expect something like that. You know how she is. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sadness settle before I spoke. I understand, I whispered. She grew up differently. He hesitated, then said, yes. She didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't respond to that. When someone doesn't mean to hurt you but does it anyway, the pain is the same. He sensed my silence and added, maybe we can talk about it soon. But we didn't talk soon. We didn't talk for almost 3 weeks. During those weeks, I thought a lot about my husband. He would have known what to say. He had a way of softening difficult things with a single sentence. I imagined him sitting at the kitchen table with his warm smile, shaking his head slowly and saying, let people be who they are, Helen. We only control our side of the story. I tried to hold on to that, but it was harder than I expected. Because it wasn't just about the car. It was about the feeling that Maya had drawn a line in the sand. A line where I stood alone on one side, and she and Daniel stood together on the other. One afternoon, about a month later, Daniel called again and said they would stop by. He didn't explain why. I felt a quiet anxiety rise inside me, a mix of hope and worry. I cleaned the house even though no one had asked me to. I prepared tea. I baked small biscuits, the kind Daniel used to love when he was a boy. When they arrived, Maya walked in first. She didn't smile, but she wasn't cold either. She seemed distracted, as though she had already decided she wouldn't make eye contact for too long. Daniel followed behind her, carrying a folder under his arm. I noticed it right away. He was never the type to carry documents unless something important needed to be discussed. We sat at the dining table. The tea steamed softly between us. The sunlight fell through the window in calm golden lines, as if trying to settle the tension in the air. Then Daniel spoke. "Mom," he said, "we want to talk to you about something." I folded my hands on the table and nodded gently, waiting. He exchanged a quick look with Maya. She cleared her throat and finally looked at me, though only briefly. "We are planning to buy a new house," she said. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "A bigger one, with more space." I smiled softly. "That is good news," I said. "I hope it brings you comfort." But she continued. "We also want to reorganize our finances," she said. "And there is something we need from you." My heart shifted a little, not in fear yet, but in uncertainty. Daniel placed the folder on the table and opened it slowly. Papers slipped out, mortgage documents, financial plans, and a page that had my name printed at the top in bold letters. I felt my pulse quicken. Daniel took a breath. "We want to use your house as collateral," he said. My face warmed, not from anger, but from shock. "My house?" I whispered. "For what?" He spoke gently, but his words carried a weight I was not prepared to hold. "For the down payment, Mom. It will only be temporary. Once we settle into the new house, we will refinance." I looked at Maya. She sat still, her expression unreadable, as if the conversation had nothing to do with family or trust, but only numbers and papers. "You want me to risk my home?" I asked softly. Daniel leaned forward. "You will not lose anything," he said. "We just need your help. The bank will approve us faster with your house as backup." I felt my hands tremble slightly under the table. My home was the place my husband and I built together. The place Daniel grew up. The place where every corner held a memory. "I cannot do that," I said gently. "This house is all I have left." Maya looked away, and I noticed the small sigh she let out, quiet but full of irritation. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. "Mom, we are trying to start a family," he said. "We need space. We need this house." I nodded slowly. "And I understand that. But I also need security." The silence that followed felt thick and heavy. Maya finally spoke, her voice colder than before. "You don't trust us." Her statement wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "It is not about trust," I whispered. "It is about safety. I am old, Maya. If something goes wrong, I have nowhere to go." She pressed her lips together and looked away again. Daniel closed the folder with a quiet thud. "We thought you would support us," he said. His voice carried disappointment, but also something sharper, something that told me this conversation had been rehearsed between them many times before they brought it to me. "I do support you," I said softly. "Just not in a way that risks my home." He shook his head and leaned back in his chair. "I guess we misjudged," he murmured. The words stung more than they should have, as though I had failed some test I didn't know I was taking. They stayed for only a few more minutes. They didn't eat the biscuits. They didn't finish their tea. When they stood to leave, I walked them to the door. Maya stepped outside first without looking back. Daniel lingered. For a moment, I thought he might hug me. Instead, he put his hands in his pockets and said, softly but firmly, "You really hurt her feelings, Mom." Then he turned and walked away before I could respond. I watched them drive off, their car shrinking down the street until it disappeared around the corner. The house felt unbearably quiet when I stepped back inside. I sat at the dining table where the untouched tea had already grown cold. And for the first time in many years, I cried without trying to hide it from anyone. The days after their visit felt heavier than before. I tried to go through my usual routines, watering the plants, wiping the counters, folding laundry, but everything felt quieter, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I found myself pausing in the middle of simple tasks, just standing there with a cloth or a cup in my hand, wondering how things had changed so quickly. My home used to feel full, even when I was alone. Now it felt like a place waiting for someone who would never arrive. I kept thinking about Daniel's final words at the door. "You really hurt her feelings, Mom." I turned those words over in my mind again and again. How could I hurt someone by protecting the only home I had? How could the desire to feel safe become an act of selfishness? One evening, I sat in the living room with the old Toyota key in my hand. I had taken it off my husband's key ring after he passed, but I never used it. I just kept it as something that still held his warmth. I wondered what he would say about all of this. He had always believed in kindness, but he also believed in boundaries. He used to tell me, love doesn't mean giving everything away. It means giving what you can without losing yourself. I realized I had forgotten that for a moment. I had tried so hard to be gentle that I didn't notice my heart slowly stepping back, trying to protect itself. A week later, I went to the small grocery store near my house. It was a quiet place, the kind with soft music playing overhead and aisles that didn't feel crowded. I had just placed apples in my cart when I heard someone call my name. It was Mrs. Parker, my neighbor of almost 20 years. She looked at me closely and said, "Helen, you look tired. Is everything all right?" I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I forced a small smile. "I'm fine," I said, even though the lie sat uncomfortably on my tongue. She reached out and touched my arm gently. "Sometimes," she said, "the quietest women carry the heaviest burdens." Her words were so soft, but they unlocked something inside me. I nodded, blinked against the sting in my eyes, and whispered, "It's just family things." She didn't ask for details. She simply squeezed my arm and said, "Family can test us in ways strangers never will." When I returned home, I found an envelope on my doorstep. My heart skipped a beat when I saw Daniel's handwriting. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened it slowly. Inside was a simple card with a short message. "Mom, we need some space for now. We will reach out when we are ready. Please understand." There was no mention of love. No apology. No explanation. Just distance. I closed the card gently and placed it on the table. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from me, wishing the years would reverse just long enough to hear Daniel's young voice calling me Mama again. But life doesn't move backward. It only moves forward, even when our hearts lag behind. The silence that followed their message stretched on for weeks. I tried not to hope for a call, but every time the phone rang, my heart jumped before I could stop it. I knew they were building their own life, but I didn't know where I belonged in it anymore. I had once imagined being the grandmother who rocked babies to sleep and cooked warm meals on weekends. But now, even imagining those things felt like touching something fragile that could crack at any second. One afternoon, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that whispers rain but doesn't deliver it yet. As I walked, I noticed a for sale sign in front of the house 2 streets over. A young couple was standing outside with a realtor, talking excitedly. I watched them for a moment, remembering when Daniel and Maya were newly married, full of hope and dreams. Back then, they used to invite me to dinner once a week. We would sit together and talk about their plans, and I would listen with a quiet joy. It hurt to realize how far away those days felt. When I returned home, something in me finally broke open. I walked into the garage and sat inside the old Toyota. The seat still smelled faintly of the lavender air freshener my husband used to like. I placed my hands on the steering wheel and closed my eyes. I could almost hear his gentle humming. I felt the thickness of memory press against me, and tears came again, quiet, steady, unavoidable. I cried for the car. I cried for my husband. I cried for the son I felt I was losing. And I cried for myself, for the loneliness that had settled over my life like a soft, heavy blanket. A few days later, I received a message from an unknown number. It was short. "This is Maya. We left the Toyota in your driveway. We don't want it." I opened my front door and saw the car parked in the exact spot where I had once surprised her with it. The keys were placed neatly on the hood. For a long moment, I just stood there, letting the wind brush past me, carrying the faint scent of rain. Their rejection was complete now. Not just of the car, but of everything it represented, my effort, my memory, my love. I walked to the car, picked up the keys, and held them tightly. I whispered, I tried. Then I brought the car back into the garage and closed the door with a soft click. The sound echoed through the space, like the closing of a chapter one had not been ready to end. The next morning, I woke with a heavy but strangely clear feeling in my chest. There was no anger, only a quiet acceptance that some things break even when you try to hold them gently. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the sunlight spill across the floor. The world was still moving. Life was still happening. And I realized that even though I felt left behind, I was still here, breathing, standing, living. And I would have to find a way to carry on, with or without their presence. The weeks that followed felt strangely calm, as if life had paused around me but kept pushing me forward at the same time. I moved through my days with a quiet routine: tea in the morning, sweeping the front porch, checking on the plants, reading in the late afternoon. On the outside, everything looked normal. But inside, I felt like a guest in my own life, moving through familiar rooms that no longer felt warm in the way they once did. I tried to tell myself that the silence from Daniel and Maya was temporary, but some part of me knew the distance was not an accident. It was something they chose, something they believed was necessary for them. And I had to learn how to live with that choice, even if it wasn't mine. One morning, after a restless night of sleep, I decided to drive to the old cafe my husband and I used to visit on Sunday mornings. It wasn't fancy. The tables were scratched from years of use, the chairs wobbled a little, and the coffee was always a little too strong. But it was comfortable, safe, familiar. When I walked inside, the little bell above the door chimed, just as it always did. The barista, a young woman with kind eyes, recognized me. "It's been a while," she said with a gentle smile. "Your usual?" I nodded, and she prepared the same cup of tea I'd been ordering for years. I sat near the window and watched people pass by. Couples, families, friends, everyone moving with purpose, with connection, with something pulling them forward. I felt a small ache in my chest, but it was softer than before, gentler. A reminder rather than a wound. As I sipped my tea, I found myself thinking about Daniel as a child. The way he used to run toward me after school, his backpack bouncing behind him. The way he used to show me his drawings with such pride. The way he would sit beside me on the couch and rest his head on my shoulder. I wondered where those moments had gone. I wondered when the shift happened, when he stopped seeing me as someone to run to, and instead saw me as someone in his way. I don't believe it happened overnight. These things rarely do. They grow slowly, quietly, until one day you wake up and realize a whole part of your life has changed shape. That afternoon, as I drove back home, I noticed a small crack in the windshield of the Toyota. It must have been there for a while, but I hadn't looked at the car closely since they returned it. I parked it in the garage and sat in the driver's seat again, the silence around me deep and familiar. I touched the crack lightly with my fingers and whispered, "We both have our marks, don't we?" Maybe the car would never shine like a new one. Maybe I wouldn't either. But we were still standing. We were still here. Later that evening, I received a call from an unknown number. My heart jolted at the possibility that it might be Daniel, even though the number looked unfamiliar. When I answered, a calm voice said, "Hello, Mrs. Turner. This is from Lakeside Care Center." I felt the breath leave my body for a moment. My sister, Laura, lived there. She had been battling health issues for years. "Is everything all right?" I asked. The woman on the phone spoke gently. "She had a fall earlier today. She is stable, but we recommend you come by if you can." I thanked her and hung up quickly, grabbing my purse before the reality fully settled into me. When I arrived, Laura was sitting up in bed, her face pale, but her eyes brightening when she saw me. "I'm all right," she said, forcing a smile. "Just bruised my pride more than my hip." I sat beside her and held her hand tightly. We talked for a while, about her fall, about the nurses, about the small garden outside her window. But whenever there was a quiet moment, she would look at me with soft concern, as if she sensed something deeper in my silence. Finally, she asked, "Are you all right, Helen?" I hesitated. Then I shook my head. "Not really," I whispered. She didn't push me to explain. Instead, she squeezed my hand and said, "You've always tried to carry everything alone. But you don't have to." Her words settled gently around me, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself breathe. On my way home that night, the streets were dim and mostly empty. The streetlights cast long shadows across the road, and the quiet hum of the engine felt comforting. I realized how much I had missed simply being with someone who cared without expecting anything. Someone who didn't measure my worth by what I could offer financially or materially. Someone who loved me because I was me. The contrast between that warmth and the distance from Daniel and Maya felt sharper than ever, but also clearer. It reminded me that relationships built on love feel light, even in difficult times. Relationships built on expectation and pride feel heavy, even in simple moments. When I reached home, I sat in the living room for a long time. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I just let the darkness settle around me. Then, quietly, almost without thinking, I whispered, "I miss you." I wasn't sure if those words were meant for my husband, for Daniel, or for the version of myself that felt far away now. Maybe they were meant for all three. I lay my hand on the cushion beside me, imagining my husband's steady presence. I wondered what he would say about everything that had happened. I could almost hear him saying, "Heal at your own pace, Helen. Not theirs." The next few days passed slowly. I visited my sister again, helped her with small things, and spent more time outside in the garden. The world around me was beginning to shift toward colder weather. Leaves had started to fall, gathering in small piles along the edges of the walkway. I watched them scatter with each breeze and felt a strange comfort in their movement. There was something peaceful about letting go when the time was right. Nature never forced anything. It simply accepted the seasons. One quiet morning, as I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, I realized something important. I had been waiting for Daniel to return to me, but I had not returned to myself. I had let the hurt linger too long without tending to it. I had pressed my feelings down so far that they had begun to shape the way I saw everything around me. I needed to breathe again. I needed to rebuild, not for anyone else, but for me. And yet, even with that clarity, a part of me still longed for my son's voice, for the closeness we once shared. Love doesn't disappear just because it is wounded. It sits quietly in the heart, waiting for a chance to heal. I didn't know then that a bigger shift was coming. Something that would force all of us, me, Daniel, and even Maya, to face the distance between us. Something that would reveal things I had not seen, things I had not understood, and things that would change our family once more. But at that moment, wrapped in a blanket on my porch, listening to the gentle wind move through the trees, I only knew one thing. I was tired of breaking quietly. And whether or not Daniel ever came back to me, I needed to learn how to stop hurting myself in the process. The moment everything began to shift came on a gray afternoon, the kind where the sky hangs low and the air feels still. I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard the faint buzz of my phone on the table. I almost ignored it. Most calls these days were from doctors, service reminders, or automated messages. But something nudged me to check. When I picked up the phone, I saw Daniel's name on the screen. My heart stopped for a second, then began beating so quickly I felt my hands tremble. I hesitated before answering, as if I needed a moment to steady my breathing, to prepare for whatever words he might bring. When I finally pressed the button, all I could manage was a soft hello. His voice sounded tired. Not angry, not distant, just tired. "Mom," he said quietly, and the simplicity of the word loosened something inside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed. "Can we talk?" The way he said it made me sit down slowly on the edge of the couch, as if the ground beneath me had shifted. "Yes," I said gently. "I'm here." There was another pause, longer than the first. I imagined him sitting somewhere alone, maybe in his car, maybe at work, holding his phone and trying to find the right words. He had always been like that, careful, thoughtful, sometimes too slow to speak because he didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. It reminded me of the boy he used to be. After a long breath, he said, "I'm sorry for everything that happened with Maya. I should have handled it better." His voice wavered slightly, the way it did when he was trying to stay composed. I felt a soft ache spread through me, a mix of relief and sadness. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. I didn't try to fill the silence with explanations or excuses. Sometimes the heart needs quiet more than it needs words. We stayed on the phone like that for a moment before he cleared his throat. "Mom, Maya is pregnant." My hands froze in my lap. The room around me seemed to fade into a soft blur. Pregnant. I repeated, not because I hadn't heard him, but because I needed a moment for the reality to settle inside me. Yes, he said. A little over 3 months now. My first reaction, unexpectedly, was joy. A small, warm spark that bloomed in my chest. A grandchild, something I had dreamed about quietly for years. But almost immediately, the spark was wrapped in a layer of uncertainty. Would I be allowed to be part of this child's life? Would Maya want me near? Would the baby grow up hearing stories of a grandmother who once caused trouble, or a grandmother who tried her best? I tried to keep my voice steady as I said, "That's wonderful news." Daniel exhaled, almost in relief. "I wanted to tell you sooner," he said softly. "But things have been complicated." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "I understand," I said. And I did. Maybe for the first time, I truly understood how tangled life had become for him. Trying to balance his wife's expectations, his worries about money, his hopes for the future, and the guilt he carried about how everything with me had unfolded. He wasn't a bad son. He was a tired man. A man who felt pulled in too many directions. Then his voice grew quieter. "Mom, I need your help." Those words surprised me. I straightened a little, my heart tightening. With what? He hesitated again, and I could hear the strain in his breathing. Maya's pregnancy has been harder than we expected. She's been sick almost every day. She can't work right now. And with the baby coming, we're falling behind on bills. I closed my eyes, absorbing his words slowly. I could hear the shame beneath them. The quiet embarrassment of asking for something he never wanted to ask for. "What do you need?" I asked softly, though a small part of me already knew the answer. "A loan," he finally said. "Not a big one. Just enough to get us through the next couple of months." I stayed silent, feeling the weight of the request settle between us. It wasn't the money that made me hesitate. It was the fear of repeating a cycle I had only just begun to step away from. A cycle where giving too much made me invisible and giving too little made me a problem. Daniel must have sensed my pause because he quickly added, "I hate asking you. I really do. But I don't know what else to do right now." I took a slow breath. "Daniel," I said gently, "I'm not upset that you asked. But I need to understand something before I say yes." He waited. "If I help, will it bring us closer? Or will it put us back into the same place we were before?" The line went quiet. I could feel him thinking, weighing his words carefully. "I don't want that to happen again," he said finally. "I want us to be better. I want you to be part of the baby's life. I want things to be different." His voice cracked just slightly at the end, and my heart softened in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew then that I would help him. Not because of pressure. Not because I felt obligated. But because I wanted to support him in a moment of real need. Not as a wallet. Not as a burden. As his mother. Still, I also knew I had to protect my heart and his from falling into old patterns. So I said, "I will help. But let's do it the right way this time. Comfortable for both of us. Clear, simple, respectful." He agreed immediately. And in that moment, something undone between us began to repair itself, slowly, like a tear being stitched back together with careful hands. Before we ended the call, Daniel said quietly, "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle deep inside. "You're my son," I whispered. "I could never give up on you." After we hung up, I stayed on the couch for a long time, my hand still resting near the phone. A soft warmth spread through me. Not the wild joy of reconciliation, but a gentle relief. A knowing that healing was possible, even after pain. Even after silence. Even after everything. That night, as I prepared for bed, I stood at the window and looked at the moon hanging quietly in the sky. Its light was soft and imperfect, just like the place my family and I had reached. But it was enough. Enough to guide us through the dark. Enough to remind me that even when relationships crack, they can still hold light. I didn't know what challenges would come with the baby. I didn't know what role Maya would allow me to play. But I knew that Daniel had taken the first step toward us. And I knew that I had taken one too. Sometimes that's how healing begins, not with grand moments, but with a single phone call on a quiet afternoon. The next few days felt heavier than I expected, even after the gentle warmth of reconnecting with Daniel. I thought the phone call would lift a weight off my chest, but instead it brought a mix of hope and fear. Hope, because I could hear the boy I raised again, soft, sincere, trying his best. Fear, because I knew that stepping forward meant stepping into delicate territory with Maya. I wanted to be part of their lives, but not at the cost of losing myself again. That evening, after dinner, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened my old notebook. It was full of little thoughts, reminders, and reflections I wrote after my husband passed. I turned to a blank page and wrote only one sentence: "Move with care, but keep moving." It felt like something he would have said. The next morning, I called Daniel. My voice wavered slightly at first, but he sounded relieved to hear from me. We talked through the details gently, what they needed, how I could help without it becoming a burden. We agreed I would come by their apartment the following week to drop off a few things for the baby and talk through the loan in person. It was a small step, but it felt like a big one for us. After we hung up, I sat for a moment and let the quiet settle. I whispered a small hope to myself: let this be different. I wasn't asking for perfection. I wasn't even asking for closeness. Just respect, kindness, and space to love them without being pushed away. As the days passed, I prepared slowly and carefully. I knitted a tiny blanket, soft and simple, not wanting anything fancy, just something warm for the baby to be wrapped in. I bought a few gentle soaps and creams for pregnant women, remembering the brand I used to love when I was expecting Daniel. And then, I found a small box tucked away in the back of my closet. Inside was the wooden rattle Daniel's father had carved when I was pregnant. It was smooth from years of being held, with soft curves and tiny painted stars. My breath caught when I held it. I had saved it for this moment, even when I wasn't sure it would ever come. I placed it carefully inside a small bag, my heart feeling both full and fragile. When the day finally came to visit Daniel and Maya, the sky was overcast, the kind where the light feels muted and gentle. I took a slow breath before leaving the house, reminding myself that whatever happened, I would remain calm, kind, honest. The drive to their apartment felt longer than usual, though the roads were familiar. When I parked outside, I sat for a moment with my hands gripping the steering wheel. My heart was beating too quickly, like it used to before important events, parent-teacher meetings, doctor appointments, even the first time I met Maya. But eventually, I forced myself to breathe slowly and step out of the car. Daniel opened the door before I could knock. He looked tired and worn, but his smile was real. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. Something inside me relaxed at the sight of him. He stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. The apartment was neat but clearly lived in. A pair of shoes near the door, a blanket draped over the couch, tissues on the coffee table. I glanced around gently, taking it all in, not wanting to seem intrusive. "Maya's in the bedroom," Daniel said quietly. "She's been resting most of the day." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "I hope she's feeling a little better," I said. Some days are harder than others. A few minutes later, Maya stepped out slowly. She looked pale, her hair tied back loosely, her hand resting on her lower back. I didn't know what I expected in that moment, but the look on her face surprised me. There was no anger, no sharpness, just exhaustion. And something else, maybe vulnerability. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. "Hello," she said softly. "Hello, Maya," I replied in the same gentle tone. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Daniel cleared his throat and gestured to the couch. "Let's sit." We settled into the living room, the air feeling careful, almost fragile. I placed the small bag in my lap. "I brought a few things," I said quietly. Maya's eyes flickered toward it, curious but cautious. I reached inside and pulled out the soft blanket I had knitted. Her hand moved slightly, almost unconsciously, toward her stomach. I set the blanket on the coffee table with a slow motion. Then I pulled out the rattle. The moment she saw it, her expression changed. Something softened in her eyes, though she tried to hide it. "Daniel told me," she said in a quiet voice, "that his father made that." I nodded. "He did. For Daniel." I thought, maybe your baby could have it too. For the first time in a long while, Maya's eyes met mine fully. There was no defensiveness there, only a kind of quiet surprise. She reached out and touched the rattle lightly, her fingers tracing the small stars. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't need to. The way she handled it so delicately was enough. For a moment, the room felt less tense, the air a little warmer. Daniel let out a breath I don't think he realized he'd been holding. We talked a little after that. Not deeply, not emotionally, just simple things. How she had been feeling. How the baby was growing. What the doctors had said at her last appointment. I listened carefully, nodding, offering warmth without overstepping. I didn't try to give advice unless she asked. I didn't comment on their choices. I just stayed present, like a quiet place to rest. Eventually, Daniel brought up the loan. We spoke gently about what they needed, how they planned to use it, and how we could keep things fair. Maya listened with her hands folded on her lap. Her face stayed calm, though it carried the weight of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. When we finished, she said softly, "Thank you for helping." Her voice wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was sincere. And that was more than enough. Before I left, I stood near the doorway while Daniel helped me with my coat. "Mom," he whispered, "thank you for coming." His eyes were glassy with emotion, though he blinked it away quickly. I brushed my hand gently along his arm. "I'll always come when you need me," I said. And I meant it. But I also meant the unspoken rest, as long as it doesn't break me. When I stepped outside, the air was cooler, carrying the faint smell of rain. I walked to my car slowly, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter, because I saw glimpses of hope. Heavier, because I knew the path ahead would not be easy. Healing rarely is. But as I sat inside the car and placed my hand on the steering wheel, I whispered to myself, one gentle step at a time. It felt like the only way forward. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the quiet hum of something new forming. Not happiness. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of peace. In the days after my visit to Daniel and Maya's apartment, I carried a quiet hope inside me, one I tried not to hold too tightly. Hope can be fragile when relationships are still healing, and I didn't want to place too much weight on a single good afternoon. Still, I found myself thinking about the baby more often, the tiny heartbeat, the small life forming quietly, the future that could bring us all closer if we handled things gently. I also thought about Maya, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the way her fingers had rested on the wooden rattle as if she was afraid it might break. Something in her expression that day had stayed with me. Not gratitude, not regret, something softer, something unsure. Maybe she, too, was trying to figure out how to move forward. A week later, Daniel began calling me more often. Short calls, sometimes just a few minutes long. He would ask how I was doing, how my garden looked, what I was cooking that evening. Small things, simple things, but they mattered. Each call felt like stitching another thread between us. I could hear the changes in his voice, the relief, the gentleness returning, the way he no longer sounded like he was walking on a thin rope. One evening, he called while Maya was asleep, and he spoke in a hushed tone, the way he used to when we talked quietly after school. "Mom," he said, "I've missed this." My heart warmed at his honesty. "I've missed you too," I replied. And it was true. I hadn't realized how much until that moment. When Maya opened the door, she looked pale and frightened. Her hair was messy, her hands trembling slightly as she leaned against the wall for support. "It hurts when I move," she whispered. I stepped toward her gently, guiding her with a light touch on her back. "We'll go slowly," I said. "One step at a time." She nodded, breathing shallowly, trusting me in a way she never had before. It struck me then how vulnerable she was, how alone she must have felt when she called. She could have called anyone, her friends, a neighbor, even an ambulance, but she had called me. The drive to the clinic was quiet except for her breathing, uneven and strained. I kept my voice calm, like a soft blanket. "You're doing well," I repeated every so often. "We're almost there." When we arrived, I helped her inside, staying by her side as the nurses checked her in. She gripped my hand tightly, her knuckles turning white. For a moment, she wasn't my daughter-in-law. She was just a scared young woman who needed someone to lean on. After the nurses took her to be examined, I sat in the waiting room, my hands clasped together. It was the same clinic where I had once waited during my own pregnancy checkups. The memories came back softly, my husband's warm hand in mine, the quiet excitement of hearing Daniel's heartbeat for the first time. As I sat there, I wondered if Maya was hearing the same sounds now, the same reassurance. I prayed silently for the baby, for her, for Daniel. Eventually, a nurse approached me with a gentle smile. "She's stable," she said. "It looks like false labor. The baby is fine, but she needs rest, hydration, and to avoid stress." Relief spread through me slowly, like warmth in cold hands. When I stepped into the room, Maya was lying in the bed, her face calmer but still tired. She looked at me with eyes that held a different kind of weight now, a softer one. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't know who else to call. I sat beside her and touched her hand lightly. "You're not alone," I said. "Not now. Not ever." She looked away for a moment, her lip trembling slightly. Then she said something I had never expected to hear. I thought you didn't like me." Her voice cracked at the edge. The honesty in her words pierced me gently. "Maya," I said softly, "I never disliked you. I was hurt sometimes, yes. But I always hoped we could understand each other." Tears filled her eyes, turning them glassy. "I was jealous," she confessed quietly. "You and Daniel were so close. I felt like I couldn't match that." Her words took me by surprise. Jealousy was something I had never even considered. I thought back to all the moments when she seemed distant, tense, or defensive. Moments where her tone had been sharp or her patience short. I had never realized those actions came from insecurity, not anger. "You didn't have to match anything," I said gently. "There was always space for both of us in his heart." Maya wiped her eyes, whispering, "I'm sorry for the things I said before. For the way I acted that day about the car." I felt a small ache when she mentioned it, but it was softer now, like an old bruise instead of an open wound. "It's in the past," I said. And I meant it. Truly. After she was discharged, I drove her back home, making sure she was settled comfortably before leaving. As I stood at the doorway, she looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her before: gratitude, humility, and something like trust. "Thank you," she said again, but this time her voice was steadier. I nodded gently. "Rest well," I whispered. "I'll check on you later." When I returned home, the house felt different. Not lighter exactly, but more open. As if some invisible door had finally been unlocked, allowing the air to move freely again. I sat down on the couch, letting out a long breath I didn't know I had been holding. For the first time in a long time, I felt something warm settle softly in my chest. Something that felt like the beginning of forgiveness. Something that felt like the beginning of family again. Maya wiped her eyes, whispering, "I'm sorry for the things I said before. For the way I acted that day about the car." I felt a small ache when she mentioned it, but it was softer now, like an old bruise instead of an open wound. "It's in the past," I said. And I meant it. Truly. After she was discharged, I drove her back home, making sure she was settled comfortably before leaving. As I stood at the doorway, she looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her before: gratitude, humility, and something like trust. "Thank you," she said again, but this time her voice was steadier. I nodded gently. "Rest well," I whispered. "I'll check on you later." When I returned home, the house felt different. Not lighter exactly, but more open. As if some invisible door had finally been unlocked, allowing the air to move freely again. I sat down on the couch, letting out a long breath I didn't know I had been holding. For the first time in a long time, I felt something warm settle softly in my chest. Something that felt like the beginning of forgiveness. Something that felt like the beginning of family again. The day after Maya's clinic visit, Daniel came to see me. I wasn't expecting him, so when I heard a knock at the door, my first thought was that it was a delivery or a neighbor. But when I opened it and saw him standing there, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched, my heart softened immediately. He looked like the young boy who used to come home after a difficult day, unsure whether to cry or ask for help. "Mom," he said, his voice low. "Maya told me everything." I stepped aside so he could enter, and he walked in slowly, as if carrying a weight he didn't quite know how to set down. We sat in the living room, the afternoon light filling the room with a soft glow. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "She said you dropped everything to help her," he said. His voice cracked slightly. "She said she didn't know what she would have done without you." I listened quietly, letting him speak at his own pace. He shook his head gently. "Mom, thank you. Really." I placed my hand on his arm. "She needed someone," I said softly. "I was close. And I care." He nodded, but his eyes were glassy, full of things he hadn't yet said. After a long moment, he whispered, "I'm sorry for how she treated you." "And how I handled everything." His voice was shaky, like he had been holding those words for too long. I took a slow breath before responding. "Daniel," I said, "the past hurt, yes. But what matters now is that we're trying." He rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand, like he used to do when he was overwhelmed. "I didn't realize she felt so threatened by our closeness," he admitted. I thought you two just didn't get along." I felt a quiet sadness as I listened. "Sometimes," I said softly, "people carry insecurities they don't know how to name. It makes them act in ways they don't mean." He nodded again, slowly absorbing my words. Then he looked at me with a sincerity I hadn't seen in years. "I want this to be different now," he said. "For you, for her, for the baby." Hearing him say that felt like a warm hand on my heart, gentle, steady, genuine. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let myself feel the fragile joy rising inside me. "We'll move slowly," I said when I opened them again. "But we'll move together." Over the next few weeks, Maya began reaching out to me in small ways. Sometimes she would send a short message, "Baby is kicking a lot today," or a picture of an ultrasound, her hand placed gently over her growing belly. At other times, she called me to ask simple questions, like which tea helped with nausea or what foods were good for energy. Each message felt like a tiny bridge being built between us, fragile but real. I never pushed too hard. I answered kindly, simply, and let her set the pace. One afternoon, she invited me to join her for a prenatal class. When I read the message, my first instinct was to question whether she really meant it. But the words were clear, and there was a small heart at the end of the message. I smiled softly, feeling a gentle warmth spread through me. At the class, she walked a little slower than the other mothers, her hand resting protectively on her belly. I stayed beside her, not leading, not pushing, just present. During one of the breathing exercises, she whispered, "I'm glad you came." Her voice was shy, as if speaking a new language she wasn't used to. "I'm glad you invited me," I replied. And I meant it. As the weeks passed, Daniel and Maya asked me to visit more often. Sometimes I brought warm soups or cooked small meals for Maya, who still had days when her energy would drop suddenly. Sometimes we just sat together in their living room, watching quiet shows or talking about names for the baby. They told me they were waiting to find out the gender. They wanted it to be a surprise, the way life surprises us with things we never knew we needed. One evening, something unexpected happened, something small, but important. I was sitting on the couch next to Maya when she suddenly took my hand and placed it gently on her belly. "The baby's moving right now," she said softly. My breath caught. I held still, my hand resting lightly on the curve of her stomach. A moment later, I felt a soft, gentle flutter against my palm. A tiny kick. A tiny hello. Tears filled my eyes without warning, and I swallowed hard, trying not to let them fall. "That's your grandchild," Maya whispered. Her voice trembled too, but with warmth this time. That moment changed something deep inside all of us. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, like a tiny light turning on in a dark room. A light that didn't disappear. A few days later, Daniel called me after work. "Mom," he said, sounding excited. "The baby shower is next month. We want you to help plan it." The words took me by surprise. For a second, I didn't respond. Then my voice came out soft and warm. "I'd love to." It wasn't about organizing a party. It was about being included, being wanted, being part of something again. In the following weeks, we worked together to plan the baby shower. Maya picked soft colors, cream and pale green. Daniel handled the food. I helped with small decorations and a gentle theme. When I suggested a tiny wooden star as part of the centerpieces, Maya smiled, remembering the old rattle I had brought. That would be perfect, she said quietly. Each detail felt like another stitch pulling us closer, repairing the old tear carefully, slowly, lovingly. Still, despite all the progress, I kept my heart steady, knowing that healing doesn't erase everything overnight. Some wounds take longer. Some trust needs time. But every time I left their apartment, I walked away with a softer heart than before, and something I had not felt in a long time, the calm joy of belonging. Yet, real peace rarely comes without one more test. One more challenge that shows you how strong or fragile a bond truly is. And though I didn't know it then, a moment was coming that would test everything we had rebuilt. A moment that would either deepen our connection or break it again. But sometimes, life knows how to surprise you in the most unexpected ways. And remind you that love, when held gently, can survive nearly anything. The test arrived on a quiet morning, one of those slow days when the sky is soft and gray, and the world feels sleepy. I was in my kitchen, cutting fruit for breakfast, when my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. His message was short, almost hurried. "Mom, can you come over? Something happened." My heart tightened a little, but I tried not to assume the worst. I grabbed my sweater, locked the house, and drove to their place with a steady but anxious rhythm in my chest. When I reached their apartment, the door was already slightly open. I stepped inside and found Daniel pacing near the window. Maya was on the couch, her hands folded over her belly, her face pale. I walked toward them slowly, gently, as if entering a room full of fragile glass. "What happened?" I asked, my voice soft. Daniel turned to me, his eyes full of worry. "She slipped in the bathroom," he said. "She didn't fall hard, but it scared us. The doctor said the baby is okay, but we just didn't want to be alone." I nodded and sat beside Maya. She looked at me with eyes that held fear, exhaustion, and something else, trust. "I felt fine afterward," she whispered. But the moment I realized I could have hurt the baby, I just froze. I reached for her hand and held it gently. "Fear comes quickly," I told her softly. "But the important part is you're safe. And the baby is safe too." She leaned her head back and took a long breath. The room stayed quiet for a moment, except for Daniel's slow footsteps. Then something happened that I didn't expect. Maya turned her head toward me, her eyes shiny with tears that she didn't wipe away. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. The simplicity of her voice, the rawness, made the room feel even quieter. "For everything," she added. "For how I treated you. For the unkind things I said. I was scared of losing him. I didn't know how to share him." Her words moved through me like a soft ache. Not sharp, not painful, just deeply human. I took her hand with both of mine and held it gently. "You don't lose love by sharing it," I said. "It only grows." She lowered her eyes, and one tear slipped down her cheek. "I know that now," she whispered. Daniel stopped pacing and stood beside us. He placed his hand on Maya's shoulder, then looked at me. "We want you to be part of this, part of our family. Really part of it. Not just at a distance." I felt warmth rise inside me, slow and steady. After all the storms, after all the misunderstandings, after the fear and the hurt, here we were, sitting together, speaking honestly. Sometimes life circles back to the simplest truths. Love needs space, but it also needs closeness. The next few days, I stayed with them. Not to take over, not to control anything, but just to be present. I cooked light meals. I helped Maya move carefully. I kept her company while Daniel worked. In the evenings, we sat quietly in the living room, soft music playing, the lamp glowing warmly. One night, as we sat together, Maya placed her hand on her belly and smiled. "He's moving again," she said. Then she looked at me almost shyly. "Do you want to feel?" I reached out gently and she guided my hand to the right spot. A tiny kick met my palm. A little push of life. A small miracle. My heart swelled so softly it almost hurt. Later that evening, after Maya went to bed, Daniel and I talked in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter with a tired but relieved expression. Mom, he said quietly, thank you for not giving up on her. Or on us. I know it wasn't easy. I smiled at him, the kind of smile only a mother can give, full of understanding, full of history. Family isn't easy, I replied. But it's worth something. And sometimes it just needs time. Then came another turning moment. A gentle one. A peaceful one. The baby shower finally arrived. Friends, relatives, neighbors, the room filled with laughter, soft lights, and warm faces. Maya wore a simple cream dress, her hair tied loosely, her smile gentle but real. Daniel hovered around her with protective pride. I stayed near them, helping when needed, stepping back when not. Something about that day felt like healing stitched into the air. A few guests came to congratulate Maya and Daniel, and many of them spoke to me too. Some said, they're lucky to have you. Others said, you must be excited to meet your grandchild. Each comment felt like a small blessing, like tiny hands lifting a weight I had carried for too long. The most surprising moment happened near the end of the shower. When it was time to open gifts, Maya held up a small box wrapped in soft green paper. This one is from me, she said quietly, looking at me instead of the crowd. She handed it to me with both hands, a gentle gesture full of meaning. I opened it slowly. Inside was a small wooden star, almost identical to the one I had brought to her months ago, the one she had once dismissed. But this one had a small engraving on it. In simple letters it said, for Grandma. My breath caught. I touched the smooth surface, the soft edges. When I looked up, Maya's eyes were warm and full of something new, acceptance, affection, maybe even love. I wanted you to know, she whispered. You belong with us. Tears filled my eyes, but they were gentle tears. Healing tears. I nodded slowly and held the star to my chest. Thank you, I whispered back. And in that moment, it felt like everything we had been through, every pain, every misunderstanding, had led us right here, to this soft, peaceful place. But life has one more chapter to write before everything fully settles. One more moment that changes everything. The last chapter began on a night that was strangely quiet. I was already in bed when my phone rang. The sound was sharp in the silence, and something inside me knew before I even saw the screen. It was Daniel. I picked up immediately. His voice trembled. Mom, it's happening. Maya's contractions started. We're on the way to the hospital. Can you come? I didn't even think. I got dressed, grabbed my bag, and left the house with a heartbeat that felt too fast and too loud. The roads were empty, the streetlights glowing like soft yellow circles in the darkness. As I drove, I kept praying in my heart. For Maya. For the baby. For strength. For calm. For whatever this night was preparing to bring. When I reached the hospital, I found Daniel sitting near the reception desk, breathing heavily, his hands shaking. She's inside, he said, standing quickly when he saw me. His eyes were full of fear and excitement all at once. She's scared. I'm scared. I placed both my hands on his shoulders, grounding him gently. It's okay, I whispered. She's in good hands. You're right here. She isn't alone. A nurse came to guide him into the labor room. He hesitated for a moment, turning to look at me. Stay close, he asked. His voice sounded young again, like the little boy who used to ask me not to leave the room during thunderstorms. I nodded. I'll be right here, I said softly. Go. She needs you. Hours passed slowly, like time was walking through water. I sat in the waiting area, hands folded in my lap, breathing quietly, whispering silent prayers into the air. The hallway lights reflected softly on the floor. Every now and then, I heard distant footsteps, muffled voices, the gentle beeping of machines. The world felt suspended, like everything was holding its breath. Finally, Daniel stepped out, his hair messy, his face flushed, his eyes full of tears. My heart jumped. What happened? I asked, standing up quickly. He didn't speak at first. He just walked toward me and wrapped his arms around me tightly, like he hadn't done since he was a child. Mom, he whispered into my shoulder. It's a girl. My breath caught. I closed my eyes. A soft, warm joy filled me like sunlight inside my chest. A girl, I repeated, my voice trembling. Is she okay? Is Maya okay? He nodded, smiling through tears. They're both okay. She's tiny and beautiful. He took my hand and guided me toward the room. When we entered, the lights were dim, and everything felt peaceful. Maya was lying in the bed, tired and glowing with a kind of warmth only new mothers have. In her arms, wrapped in a soft, cream blanket, was the baby. Daniel walked quietly to her side, and Maya looked up at me with soft, exhausted eyes. "Come closer," she whispered. I took slow steps, almost afraid that breathing too loudly might disturb the moment. Then Maya lifted the baby just a little, turning her toward me. "Meet your granddaughter," she said softly. I leaned down, and there she was. So small, so perfect. Her cheeks round and soft, her tiny fingers curled into loose fists. Her eyes were closed, her lips forming the faintest little pout. My heart melted completely. Warm tears ran down my cheeks before I could stop them. "She's beautiful," I whispered. "Would you like to hold her?" Maya asked gently. I looked at her surprised. She nodded encouragingly. Carefully, with a tenderness I didn't know my hands still held, I lifted the tiny baby into my arms. She was warm, light, fragile, and yet, in that moment, she felt like the strongest thing in my life. I held her close, breathing in her soft newborn scent. My chest tightened with a mix of love, awe, and overwhelming gratitude. As I stood there holding her, a quiet thought filled my mind. This is what all of it led to. Every argument, every misunderstanding, every tear, every apology, every slow step toward healing. Daniel placed his arm around Maya. She leaned lightly against him. They both looked at me holding their daughter, our daughter, and in that moment, something settled gently in the room. A feeling of family. A feeling of peace. After a while, I carefully handed the baby back to Maya. She held her close, smiling tiredly but honestly. Then she looked at me with eyes full of sincerity. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being here, for not walking away, for loving us even when it was hard." I touched her arm gently. "Thank you for letting me stay," I replied, "for choosing to build something new with me." The nurse came in and adjusted a few things. The room fell quiet again. Soft, warm, safe. Later that night, when they were all resting, I stepped out into the hallway. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. The hospital lights were dim, and everything felt peaceful. I took a long breath, letting the moment settle deep inside me. Life had brought us through storms, misunderstandings, hurtful words, and painful distance. It had tested us in ways we never expected. But standing there, with a new life safely sleeping inside the room behind me, I knew something important. Love that bends does not break. Kindness that waits does not disappear. And hearts that choose to understand can always find their way back to each other. This was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Daniel and Maya, but for me too. A softer chapter. A hopeful one. A chapter built on forgiveness, patience, and the quiet strength that grows from choosing love again and again. In the end, life doesn't always give us perfect moments. But sometimes, it gives us gentle ones. And those are the moments that stay. In the days that followed, I visited them often. Not to take over, not to interfere, but simply to help in the quiet ways a new family needs. Sometimes I washed a few bottles. Sometimes I rocked the baby while Maya rested. Sometimes I made warm soup or folded tiny clothes fresh from the dryer. And sometimes we all just sat together in the living room, speaking softly while the baby slept in her little cradle. Each time I stepped into their home, I felt something new growing between us. A steady warmth. A gentle trust. The kind that doesn't arrive with grand gestures, but with small, repeated moments of kindness. Maya smiled more often. Daniel relaxed more easily. And I found myself breathing in peace I hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, I held the baby as she slept, her cheek resting softly against my arm. Her tiny fingers twitched, her little lips curved into what looked like the faintest dream. I looked at her and felt a quiet truth settle inside me. Life had not forgotten me. It had simply taken the long road to bring me here. Maya walked over and sat beside me. She didn't say anything at first. She just watched her daughter sleep. After a moment, she whispered, "I used to think you were trying to replace me." Her voice was honest, without shame, just reflection. "I thought Daniel loved you in a way that left no space for me." I shook my head gently. "A son's love for his mother is different," I said softly. "It doesn't take anything away from the love he has for his wife." She nodded slowly, absorbing the words like someone tasting something new and gentle. "I see that now," she whispered. "I just needed time." I smiled. We all did. Later that evening, Daniel joined us, placing a blanket over Maya's shoulders and brushing the baby's tiny head with the softest touch. He looked at me with quiet gratitude, the kind that doesn't need words. And in that moment, sitting together with the warm glow of a small lamp filling the room, I felt something settle deep in my heart, a sense of belonging that was calm, steady, and real. A few days later, as I was preparing to leave, Maya walked me to the door. She held the baby in her arms, wrapped in a soft cream blanket. "Before you go," she said, her voice gentle, "I want you to know something." I looked at her, waiting. "You are not just Daniel's mother," she said. "You are my family too. I want our daughter to grow up knowing your love. I want her to see us together, not as two people who struggled, but as two women who learned how to stand on the same side." Her words filled my eyes with quiet tears. I reached out and touched the baby's tiny hand. "Thank you," I whispered, "for giving me a place in your life." And in hers. She smiled softly, and the baby stirred a little, making a tiny sound that made both of us laugh quietly. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I felt the weight of everything we had been through, the misunderstandings, the harsh words, the pain, the distance, but instead of hurting, it felt like something that finally made sense. Like a path we had needed to walk to understand each other better. I paused for a moment on the walkway and looked back at their door. The light from inside spilled out gently, warm and welcoming. And I realized something simple and beautiful. Family is not perfect. Family is not easy. But family is worth choosing again and again. Not because everything goes right, but because, even when things go wrong, there is still room to heal. Room to try again. Room to grow into something softer, kinder, more understanding. Life does not always give us what we expect. But sometimes, it gives us exactly what we need, just later than we hoped. As I walked toward my car, I held that truth close to my heart. This journey had taught me many things, but the most important was this: love that is patient will always find a way back. And love that forgives will always leave a gentle light behind it. A light bright enough for the next generation to follow. And soft enough to make the whole family feel like home again.